It was a warm summer night when Officer Xavier Brooks, a tall, muscular man with a commanding presence, was dispatched to a disturbance at a local gay nightclub. Xavier, 32, was known for his professionalism and no-nonsense demeanor. But tonight carried an unexplainable tension, a sense that something unexpected was about to happen. The city's nightlife buzzed in the background as he parked his patrol car outside the club, the neon lights illuminating his sharp features. Inside, chaos reigned. Music thumped loudly, colorful lights flickered, and a crowd had gathered near the bar, murmuring about a fight that had broken out. Xavier pushed his way through the throng, his keen eyes quickly locking onto a young man sitting on a stool. The man had a slight cut on his cheek, his golden blonde hair tousled, and his athletic frame tense beneath a fitted black shirt. For a moment, Xavier's usually steely composure faltered. "Are you all right, sir?" Xavier asked, his deep voice steady and authoritative. The young man, who introduced himself as Cole Anderson after some coaxing, looked up at him, his piercing blue eyes glassy from the alcohol in his system. I think so," Cole replied softly, his tone betraying a mix of embarrassment and vulnerability. Xavier noted the slight wobble in Cole's movements and the faint scent of liquor on his breath. The club manager explained that Cole had been caught in a scuffle, but wasn't a primary aggressor. Still, Xavier felt an odd protective instinct kicking in. "You're coming with me," he said firmly, though not unkindly. Cole didn't resist. Instead, he nodded and leaned on Xavier's broad frame as they left the noisy club together. The contact between them was brief, but enough to make Xavier acutely aware of how long it had been since he'd felt something so personal. Once at the patrol car, Xavier helped Cole into the passenger seat. Cole's head fell back against the headrest, his eyes fluttering shut. Xavier glanced over, taking in the softened expression on Cole's face, and fought the strange pull he felt toward the younger man. It was a distraction he couldn't afford. The drive to Cole's apartment was mostly quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space. Occasionally, Xavier would glance over, studying the way Cole's chest rose and fell with his breathing. It unnerved him how this stranger seemed to stir emotions he'd long buried under his disciplined exterior. Every glance lingered a second too long. Every fleeting thought carried more weight than it should. When they reached Cole's apartment building, Xavier hesitated before waking him. He leaned over slightly, shaking Cole's shoulder gently. Cole stirred, opening his eyes to meet Xavier's gaze. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that left Xavier more unsettled than any dangerous call he'd ever handled. "Thanks," Cole murmured, his voice soft and warm before disappearing into the building. Xavier remained in his car, staring at the door long after Cole had gone, his heart pounding with questions he couldn't yet answer. The next morning, Officer Xavier Brooks sat at his kitchen table, sipping a cup of strong black coffee. His apartment, usually a sanctuary of order and calm, felt stifling. No matter how hard he tried to shake it, images of Cole Anderson kept flashing in his mind. The way his blonde hair caught the faint light of the street lamp, the softness of his voice when he murmured that simple, "thank you." It was ridiculous, Xavier thought, to be this distracted by someone he barely knew. Yet there was no denying the knot in his stomach every time he remembered that fleeting gaze they had shared. Xavier wasn't new to handling difficult situations. His line of work often required him to compartmentalize emotions, to set aside personal feelings for the sake of duty. But Cole had breached those walls with a quiet intensity Xavier hadn't seen coming. Shaking his head, he grabbed his phone and scrolled through work emails, hoping to drown the thoughts in logistics and procedure. Yet, even the strict protocols of his job couldn't quiet the memory of Cole's blue eyes. Later that afternoon, Xavier drove to the precinct. He had a full schedule, routine patrols, paperwork, and training for newer officers. Yet, as he sat through a mundane meeting about city ordinances, his mind wandered. What was Cole doing now? Was he okay after the scuffle at the nightclub? Xavier caught himself fidgeting with his pen, something he rarely did, and forced his attention back to the discussion. It wasn't professional to dwell on someone he'd met while on duty, he reminded himself. By evening, Xavier's frustration had grown. He drove aimlessly after his shift, unwilling to go straight home to the silence of his apartment. Somehow, he found himself near Cole's neighborhood. He didn't park or stop, but slowed his car as he passed the building. It was absurd, he thought, to entertain the idea of seeing Cole again. But the idea lingered nonetheless, like a stubborn ember refusing to be extinguished. As the days passed, Xavier tried to suppress the pull he felt toward Cole. He buried himself in work, taking on extra shifts and volunteering for tougher assignments. Yet, every now and then, his thoughts betrayed him. He imagined scenarios where he might run into Cole again, at the store, in a cafe, or even during another call. The very idea of such a coincidence both thrilled and terrified him. It was a distraction he didn't need but couldn't resist. One evening, as Xavier sat on his couch watching the news, a segment about mental health among first responders caught his attention. The anchor spoke about the importance of seeking support and not bottling up emotions. Xavier scoffed at the irony. If only they knew the emotions he was suppressing now, ones he couldn't even explain to himself. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, more unsettling. It was the way Cole had made him feel seen, even in such a brief encounter. Determined to put the matter to rest, Xavier made a decision. He would let it go. Cole Anderson was just another civilian he had helped during a shift. Nothing more, nothing less. But deep down, Xavier knew he was lying to himself. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget the way his heart had raced that night, or the way it still did whenever he thought of Cole. A week passed, and Officer Xavier Brooks managed to keep his emotions in check, though thoughts of Cole Anderson lingered at the edges of his mind. The days blurred into routine, with patrols, paperwork, and late nights spent at the precinct. He convinced himself that his feelings were fleeting, a result of the intensity of that night. Yet every time his phone buzzed, he found himself hoping it was related to Cole in some way, an absurd thought that made him scoff at his own foolishness. One Friday evening, Xavier was assigned to a new patrol route that happened to include the area near Cole's apartment. He told himself it was coincidence, but as he drove past the building, he felt his grip tighten on the wheel. The quiet neighborhood was alive with the hum of nightlife, bars and restaurants bustling with people enjoying the start of the weekend. Xavier sighed and turned his attention back to his route, determined not to let his thoughts wander again. As he approached a popular coffee shop, he decided to stop for a quick break. The precinct had been unusually hectic that day, and a strong espresso felt like exactly what he needed. He entered the cafe, his broad shoulders barely fitting through the narrow doorway, and joined the line. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, offering a brief moment of solace. While waiting for his order, Xavier glanced around the room, his trained eyes scanning the crowd out of habit. His gaze stopped abruptly when he saw a familiar face. Sitting at a corner table was Cole Anderson, headphones in, his blonde hair tousled in that effortless way Xavier remembered all too well. Cole was hunched over a sketchbook, a pencil moving deftly across the page. Xavier's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, Xavier debated whether to approach. He was off duty, and technically, there was no reason to strike up a conversation. Yet, the pull was undeniable. He grabbed his coffee and, summoning his courage, walked over to Cole's table. As he approached, Cole looked up, his blue eyes widening in recognition. A smile spread across his face, lighting up the dim corner of the cafe. "Officer Brooks?" Cole asked, pulling out his earbuds. His voice was warm, though tinged with surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Xavier," he corrected, his deep voice softer than usual. "And, yeah, small world. I didn't know you were an artist." He gestured to the sketchbook, trying to keep the conversation casual despite the rapid thud of his heartbeat. Cole shrugged, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "It's more of a hobby. Helps me clear my head." He closed the book, suddenly self-conscious. "What about you? Long day on the job?" Xavier nodded, taking a seat across from him. "Something like that. Needed a break." He sipped his coffee, his gaze lingering on Cole longer than he intended. There was something about the younger man's presence that felt calming, yet electrifying at the same time. They chatted for a while, the conversation flowing more easily than Xavier had expected. Cole was witty, charming, and refreshingly honest, traits that only deepened the impression he had left on Xavier that night at the club. When it was time to leave, Xavier found himself reluctant to say goodbye. As they stood, Cole hesitated before speaking. "Thanks for stopping by, Xavier. It was nice seeing you again." "Likewise," Xavier replied, his voice steady, though his emotions were anything but. As he watched Cole walk out of the cafe and disappear into the night, Xavier couldn't help but wonder if fate was playing a role in their unexpected reunion. That night, Xavier Brooks found himself lying awake in bed, his mind swirling with thoughts of Cole Anderson. Their unexpected meeting at the cafe had reignited feelings he had tried so hard to suppress. The way Cole had smiled, the lightness in his laugh, it all lingered in Xavier's mind like a melody he couldn't forget. He stared at the ceiling, conflicted. Was it foolish to think there could be something more? Or was this just a dangerous line he was tempted to cross? The next morning, Xavier went about his routine with a newfound energy, though he tried to hide it. At the precinct, he focused on his work, filing reports and assisting younger officers with their training. But every now and then, his mind would drift back to Cole. He hated how easily the younger man occupied his thoughts. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, something Xavier wasn't sure he was ready to face. Days passed, and Xavier debated whether he should reach out to Cole. He had his number from the initial incident report, but using it felt like a breach of protocol. Still, the temptation gnawed at him. One evening, after much internal debate, he picked up his phone and scrolled to Cole's contact. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity before finally setting the phone down. No, he told himself. If Cole wanted to talk, he would reach out. Fate, however, seemed to have other plans. A few days later, Xavier was patrolling a residential area when he spotted Cole walking along the sidewalk, a grocery bag in hand. Xavier's heart skipped a beat as he slowed the patrol car, debating whether to stop. Before he could decide, Cole noticed him and waved, a warm smile spreading across his face. Xavier pulled over, rolling down the window. Fancy seeing you here, Cole said, leaning slightly toward the car. His tone was playful, but there was a genuine warmth in his eyes that made Xavier's chest tighten. Patrolling my neighborhood, or just stalking me? He added with a teasing grin. Xavier chuckled, though his voice was quieter than usual. Just doing my job. How have you been? Better, Cole admitted. Thanks to you, I didn't get caught up in any more drama at the club. He shifted the bag in his hands. You, want to walk with me? I'm just heading home. Xavier hesitated. He knew this was towing the line of professionalism, but the invitation was too tempting to resist. Parking the car nearby, he stepped out and joined Cole. As they walked, the conversation flowed easily, like old friends reconnecting. Cole talked about his art and his plans to apply to design school, while Xavier shared glimpses of his life as a cop, careful not to reveal too much. When they reached Cole's building, the younger man turned to Xavier, a faint blush on his cheeks. Thanks for the company. I know you didn't have to, but it means a lot. Xavier nodded, his voice steady despite the whirlwind inside him. Anytime, Cole. Take care. He watched as Cole disappeared into the building, his mind racing with emotions he could no longer ignore. As he walked back to his car, Xavier realized he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't yet define. Something thrilling, yet terrifying. The days following their walk weighed heavily on Xavier Brooks. Each shift felt longer, each patrol more mundane, as his mind circled back to Cole Anderson. There was something about the younger man's presence that ignited a part of Xavier he had kept hidden for years. Yet every moment of joy was tempered by fear. Fear of what pursuing this connection could mean for his career, his reputation, and his carefully guarded heart. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Xavier found himself staring at his phone again. Cole's contact sat at the top of his list, a reminder of the line he wasn't sure he should cross. But as the silence of his apartment grew unbearable, Xavier made a decision. He picked up the phone and dialed. His heart pounded with every ring until, finally, Cole's voice came through, light and cheerful. Xavier? Didn't expect to hear from you, Cole said, his tone tinged with surprise, but unmistakably pleased. I just wanted to check in, Xavier said, his deep voice softer than usual. Make sure everything's all right with you. Cole chuckled lightly, the sound sending a warmth through Xavier that he couldn't explain. I'm good. Better than good, actually. How about you? Still keeping the city safe? Xavier hesitated, the vulnerability of the moment unnerving him. Trying to, he replied. Listen, I know this might sound out of the blue, but would you want to grab a coffee sometime? Off duty, of course. There was a brief pause on the other end, long enough for Xavier to wonder if he had made a mistake. But then Cole's voice came back, soft and sincere. I'd like that. A lot, actually. Relief flooded Xavier's chest, though he kept his tone measured. They agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown the following evening. When the call ended, Xavier leaned back in his chair, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time in weeks, the tension in his chest eased, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. The next day, Xavier arrived at the cafe early, his nerves betraying his typically composed demeanor. He chose a table near the window, his broad frame slightly hunched as he fiddled with the edge of the menu. When Cole walked in, Xavier couldn't help but notice the way the younger man's presence seemed to brighten the room. Cole greeted him with a warm smile, and for a moment, Xavier forgot about the weight of his own doubts. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from art to travel to the challenges of navigating life's uncertainties. Cole was refreshingly open, his candidness a stark contrast to Xavier's more reserved nature. Yet, Xavier found himself sharing parts of his life he rarely revealed, drawn in by Cole's sincerity. As the evening wore on, Xavier realized something he hadn't expected. Being with Cole felt easy. Despite the complications and risks, the connection between them was undeniable. When they finally parted ways, Xavier walked back to his car with a faint smile on his lips, the feeling of Cole's laughter still echoing in his mind. The days following their coffee date were a whirlwind of emotions for Xavier Brooks. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so drawn to someone, so completely captivated. Cole Anderson had a way of making him feel alive in a way he hadn't realized he was missing. But with that thrill came the weight of reality. Xavier's career as a police officer demanded discipline and discretion, and his budding connection with Cole was anything but simple. One evening, Xavier sat in his patrol car during a quiet moment between calls, his thoughts inevitably drifting back to Cole. The young man's smile, his laugh, the way he had listened so intently. It all replayed in Xavier's mind like a favorite song. He pulled out his phone and stared at Cole's name in his contacts. His thumb hovered over the screen before he finally hit call. "Hey, Xavier," Cole answered, his voice light and warm. The sound immediately put Xavier at ease. "Hey," Xavier replied, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I was wondering if you were free tonight. Maybe we could grab dinner." Cole hesitated, but only for a moment. "Yeah, I'd like that. There's a little diner near my place. Nothing fancy, but the food's great." "Perfect," Xavier said, feeling a small but genuine smile tug at his lips. "I'll pick you up." Later that evening, Xavier parked in front of Cole's building and watched as the younger man walked toward his car. Dressed casually, but with an effortless charm, Cole slid into the passenger seat, his presence instantly filling the small space with warmth. The drive to the diner was filled with easy conversation, the kind that felt natural and unforced. At the diner, they chose a booth in the corner, away from the few other patrons. The atmosphere was cozy, the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling burgers filling the air. As they talked, Xavier found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He spoke about his struggles with the pressures of his job, his reluctance to let people get too close, and the challenges of balancing duty with personal desires. Cole listened intently, his blue eyes locked on Xavier's as he spoke. "I get it," Cole said softly. "It's not easy letting people in, especially when you feel like you have to keep parts of yourself hidden. But I'm glad you let me in, even just a little." The word struck a chord deep within Xavier. He nodded, his usually guarded expression softening. "You make it easy," he admitted quietly, his deep voice carrying a sincerity that surprised even him. The evening passed quickly, the conversation flowing like a river that neither of them wanted to end. When Xavier finally drove Cole home, the younger man hesitated before getting out of the car. "I had a great time tonight," Cole said, his voice soft but sure. Me too," Xavier replied, his heart pounding as their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Then, before he could second-guess himself, Xavier leaned in, his lips brushing softly against Cole's. The kiss was brief but electric, leaving both men breathless. Cole smiled as he pulled back, his cheeks tinged with a faint blush. "Good night, Xavier." "Good night," Xavier replied, his voice low and warm. As Cole walked inside, Xavier sat in the car for a moment, his fingers lightly grazing his lips. For the first time in years, he felt like he was stepping into something real, something worth the risk. Xavier couldn't shake the weight of Ryan's warning. The idea of colleagues speculating about his personal life terrified him. That night, he told Cole about the situation. Ryan knows, or at least suspects, Xavier said. We have to be more careful. Cole frowned. Does that mean hiding forever? No, Xavier said softly, but I can't risk my career. Cole reached for Xavier's hand. I'll wait, but I need to know we're in this together. Xavier nodded, though his fear lingered. The cracks in their secret were showing, and Xavier wasn't sure how much longer it could hold. The strain of secrecy began to wear on their relationship. One evening, Cole confronted Xavier. You're here physically, but emotionally, you're pulling away. I'm scared of what happens if we're exposed, Xavier admitted. And I'm scared of losing you because of that fear, Cole replied. Xavier held him tightly, his voice breaking. I don't want to lose you. Then fight for us, Cole said, his tone firm. Xavier nodded, but he knew the battle ahead would be the hardest one yet. Eventually, the tension came to a breaking point. Standing outside Cole's apartment, Xavier hesitated before knocking, fear gripping him. When Cole opened the door, Xavier's expression said it all. I'm afraid I'll fail you, Xavier admitted, that I'll hurt you. Cole's eyes filled with sadness. You already are. I can't stay in the shadows forever. I don't know how to fix this, Xavier whispered. Maybe you can't, Cole said, stepping back. As Cole closed the door, Xavier realized he had to choose between fear and love. But for now, he stood paralyzed by his own doubt. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. On a scale of 1 to 10, what score do you think this story deserves? Your feedback is super important to help us bring even more exciting and emotional stories to life. And if you have an incredible story to share, write it down in the comments. It might just become the next video on this channel. We're eager to hear from you and showcase your real experiences. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support keeps us going.